This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Sharon Vosmek of Astia. Sharon, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Hall.
So what was your background before investing in early stage companies? What did you do before this?
I've been at Astia since 2005. And prior to that, I was in graduate school actually studying women's participation in the economy.
Great. So what excites you right now?
Well, it's an interesting time, isn't it? With COVID-19 and the pandemic, I think that we're all looking at the world differently. We're looking at each other differently. We're looking at disease differently, the economy differently. Interestingly enough, my own strategy for investing has always included a very strong values component. As I look at companies, I'm always looking for outsized impact as it relates to their change the world thesis. And I'm always looking for those entrepreneurs who are really tackling some of the world's biggest challenges. So now more than ever, I am seeking those entrepreneurs who want to help, be it via therapeutics, diagnostics, but equally those who are creating amazing jobs for entrepreneurs around the globe. It's just an interesting time, isn't it, Hall?
It is. It's a new economy. It's a new age, so to speak. And I think we'll see a lot of positive things come out of it as well. The world's moving online more quickly. They're moving to more efficient models, delivery, and as opposed to driving across town to pick up something, have it delivered. And I think this is just going to accelerate a lot of the trends that are already going. Of course, it's terrible, the infectious diseases that can overtake us and surely need to be better prepared than we are right now. But I think we'll come out of it for the better.
We can hope. Absolutely.
Great. So you work with investors in startups. What's your advice for people investing in startups? What do you tell them to do before they write that first check or put money into that fund?
Sure. I'm always talking about investment as being very personal. As CEO of Astia, we apply, as I mentioned, our values to our investment strategy. And that value is that we value women as leaders. And so we're always looking for teams that include and value women as part of the leadership team. The great part is that returns a great deal of capital to investors as well. The returns on investment that includes this thesis outperform. But that's not why we started. We actually started with a much more fundamental lens, which was something as broken as venture, which only 2% of venture capital gets invested into companies where there are women leaders. As an economist, I find that problem set quite curious and certainly worth exploring. And it impacted my investment thesis for two reasons. One was it's an absolutely ridiculous number, 2%. I think anyone would agree. And then the second was that as an economist, what I know is that best-in-class venture seeks out underfunded yet outperforming elements of the economy. And as a sector, if one can call a gendered approach a sector, as a sector, they've outperformed for their customers, for their investors, and fundamentally for the economies and the jobs they've created. So I've always thought that what's been exciting or most interesting to me as an investor is what is interesting to me very personally. If you look at my portfolio, it tends to reflect where I'm seeing the world moving. We're leading in a time of real change and a very dynamic situation with COVID-19, but equally a dynamic situation with so many issues, climate crisis, food and food systems. And all of these things are very interesting to me as an investor because they are interesting to me personally.
Well, very good. So on the other side of that table, what's your advice for those running startups? What do you tell them to do before they launch that business and start raising funding?
Well, I'm loath to give entrepreneurs advice on starting businesses because I myself have never started my own high growth startup. Having said that, as an investor, I can tell you the types of entrepreneurs that I'm very drawn to, and maybe it will help someone figure out if they're journey should include entrepreneurship. I'm drawn to entrepreneurs with a fundamental understanding of the problem they're trying to solve, either through personal experience or professional experience. Often the entrepreneurs who I find are most successful, and certainly the data shows it, have quite a deal of experience within the sector they seek out to address in their startup. Most people don't realize that the average age of a successful high growth entrepreneur is 40 for women and 38 for men. And that's not because of age only, it's because of experience. And I think that experience both helps guide us to those things that will drive us as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs need real passion, they need real grit, and finding those things that we feel strongly about takes time. But equally, it gives us time to really learn about the things that we want to fix or solve in the market. And I find our best entrepreneurs come out of the sectors that they fundamentally serve when they start their startups.
Great. So let's talk about the state of investing as an angel. How do you see the industry evolving, and what changes do you see coming up for angel investors?
So I get to answer this question with a number of lenses, as you know, because I both am an angel investor, I run a global network of investors, and I have a fund. And with my unique lens, Astia invests in startups that include women, which is a phenomenal investment thesis. With my unique lens, I have sought out those investors who understand the value of that thesis and have appreciated it through the capital that has been returned to them, as well as through the performance of the underlying companies that we invest in. And what I'm seeing the world move to is much more global. I think often there are angels who talk about investing locally. They want to be near the companies they're investing in. My own strategy is very global. I'm on the board of two of my investments abroad. One of them is actually all three of them, excuse me. One is in Dublin, one's in Morocco, and one's in London. And while I have investments in North America, and I certainly have investments here in Silicon Valley, I'm not afraid to look at companies in other markets. And I actually think it's important that I look at companies that are in other markets. I think that investors today need to be placed within a global understanding. And especially if they want to find deals that are underfunded and outperforming, those hidden gems often don't sit in the bright, shiny places of entrepreneurship like Silicon Valley. They sometimes sit in Ann Arbor, Michigan, or they sit in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Dublin, Ireland. And as an investor, it's my obligation to go find those entrepreneurs. And I find that the world, when one approaches it with the perspective of a curiosity and an interest in entrepreneurship, the world is very approachable. Equally, I have a very global lens on my investment because what we know about entrepreneurs, and specifically high growth entrepreneurs and women high growth entrepreneurs, we know that where they've succeeded, it's been when they've pursued a global market. And what I mean by that is that often it's a local economy that restrains women or other represented groups. It's a local economy that defines women only as mothers, sisters, daughters, caregivers. These social definitions that are very hard to have as burdens in addition to entrepreneurship. But when an entrepreneur embraces a global marketplace and a global problem set, it's then that we see women moving into positions of power, equity, and influence, and allows women to define as entrepreneur and allows them to pursue some of our greatest challenges, as I mentioned earlier, that they choose to solve. So my global lens works for me as an investor. I'm a curious investor. I like to learn new things, but it equally works for my entrepreneurs, for those that recognize that they should be addressing problems that address a large market, which means a global market. They will be more successful, and therefore I find them more interesting.
Well, I certainly applaud that. I see many angel groups are very local. They only invest within their city or their region. And Some had a 2-hour rule. If I can't get to them within 2 hours, I can't invest in them. And over the years, I think as the internet has come in and the web has come in, people have broadened their perspective. And some groups have gotten more narrow in their investment thesis. And so you have to go broader. You have to look further afield. And I find one of the key advantages is you get to see how your region compares against other regions. And sometimes in your region, you see a startup doing something you think is unique, and then you find that every other region has 2 or 3 of the same thing going on. And it adds another perspective to it when you have a broader reach on your view of the startup community, and it puts your group into a better perspective. How often do you find that coming up?
Well, I think perspective is really key, Hall. I think you've captured something there. As an investor, we should never rely on just our own perspective. That's too narrow and too small as it compares to what we're going to seek in the form of returns from what we're seeking. At Astia, we are rigorous about using a global process to source and screen our investments. It's called the Astia Expert Sift. And if I could take a moment to tell you about it, I think that every angel should have their own sifting methodology, because bias sits firmly within the investment process, especially at the point of investment. And it's really important that as investors, we find mechanisms that really can greatly mitigate, if not fully eliminate, bias, both bias of gender, bias of race, bias of geography, and bias of all sorts of cultural components that have nothing to do with whether or not a business can succeed. But at Astia, we 20 years ago developed our own methodology to really ensure not only the success of our investors, but equally the success of the entrepreneurs that we chose to invest in. And that SIFT enables us to really harness the wisdom, as it were, of a very curated crowd. Any company that applies to Astia is seen by no fewer than 20 or 30 individuals around the globe that help us assess the market potential, customer potential, the team potential, the technology potential. And we gather that input very systematically, very thoughtfully. And notably, we also share that input with the entrepreneurs. We give full transparency to the entrepreneurs about the assessment and the measure that the community is giving to the company and to the team. And what we find is that the companies that make it through that SIFT are notable for several reasons. First and foremost, they've outperformed in the market for 20 years consistently. Over and again, the companies that come through our SIFT win for the marketplace. Equally, they've returned substantial capital to our investors, and our returns are well above market, with an IRR that has consistently hovered well above 30% ever since the launch of our activity. And that SIFT has also enabled our entrepreneurs to really access networks that lead to customers, access expertise, access serial entrepreneurs. We have over 450 serial entrepreneurs within the Astia community that help us assess the companies. And those serial entrepreneurs have run 2 or more venture-backed companies. That's a very rarefied space. And when you can access that kind of expertise to assess companies, and when you can access it to help those companies grow and really address their full potential of their company, you find this outsized performance. And I think the other notable thing about our expert SIFT is it acknowledges with great humility that as individuals, we have this burden of bias. As women, we tend to understand and relate more to those who are like us and speak like us. And notably, the same is true with men. We know that men and women alike are far more likely to invest in companies that are led by men when all other things are equal. But if you have a mechanism like the SIFT that relies on a global community of experts assessing a business rather than assessing an entrepreneur as an individual, you can greatly reduce and greatly mitigate that bias that sits firmly in the early stage investment ecosystem.
Wow, it sounds like a tremendous program. It sounds like it's going very well for you. So let's talk more about your investment thesis. Exactly what do you guys look for, and what is your thesis in particular?
So we have a very straightforward thesis, which is we will consider an investment in any high growth company across all sectors, and interestingly, across all stages, but that company must include at least one woman within a position of equity and influence. And this is the most substantial component of our thesis. It has to be that she's in a position not just that carries a title, but a position to really help drive the strategy of the business. She must be partner and participant in the strategy. That's when you see the successful impacts of the diversity that women bring to the table. But equally, she must be in a position of equity. And what we mean by that is she's got to be in the cap table, commensurate with her male peers. And you would be amazed how many times we see a company with 4 founders, 3 of them men, and 1 of them is a woman. And the men all have the same equity, and the woman has a substantially smaller stake in the business. And we'll just ask that that be fixed and repaired. But that's our thesis. And we apply it, as I mentioned, across all sectors, specifically high growth sectors. So that means that across over the years that we've been investing, our portfolio right now is weighted about 45% towards tech, about 28% med device, another 11% health and wellness. We have a nice 10% representation of clean tech. And then we have a small smattering of consumer. But the consumer tends to be consumer with the tech-enabled component, not really consumer product. We have only one consumer product company within our 54 company portfolio.
Very good. Can you talk about 1 or 2 of those companies and how they fit your thesis?
Sure. I always like to talk about our companies, and I'm always keen to want to point out that I have no favorites within the portfolio, but as I highlight them, I admire them all for what they're doing. I like to talk a little bit about our fintech portfolio right now. So in particular with today's lens, right, with COVID-19, it's curious that what will come out of this is a financial crisis. We certainly are dealing with the health crisis today, but you can already hear leaders talking about the financial crisis that's going to emerge. And within our portfolio, we have some very notable fintech investments that we believe are well positioned to address solutions for the financial crisis. And we notably have Ellevest, C-Note, and Goodworld as 3 examples of fintech entrepreneurs who are addressing some of the breaks in the market. In the case of C-Note, this is an entrepreneur out of Oakland, Catherine Berman, who is taking CDFIs. These are loans that are made available to communities, specifically in marginalized communities or communities that historically have been redlined or have not received lending, and bundling these CDFIs and making them available for individuals like you and me to hold our cash in at a higher interest rate than cash currently being offered by banks. But that money can be turned around immediately and offered out in loans via these CDFIs to small businesses in our communities. And the return is higher than cash, and the impact is so substantial. It can provide critical lending to the small businesses in our communities that we want to know can thrive in this difficult economic times. So that's on the fintech side, that we have those types of companies. On the med device side, I'm sure you can imagine we have entrepreneurs who are well positioned to address some of the emerging health concerns, notably Hawthorne Effect here in California is just announced that they'll be part of the mobile testing solutions for COVID-19. And their founder, Jody Aiken, is someone I hold very dear. She, in her prior career, was at Edwards Life Sciences, and she developed the aortic valve that sits in my own heart today. And she's an amazing innovator. And now she's running a company called Hawthorne Effect that we've invested in. And Hawthorne Effect is really a marketplace for healthcare providers to tap into their underutilized hours and make them available in the marketplace to address whatever concerns are emerging. She was founded originally to address clinical trials and the gathering of data that needs to happen in remote sites. But she's perfectly positioned to address mobile testing for something like COVID-19. And then we have others within the portfolio who are not necessarily directly addressing any of the crisis elements, but they're creating jobs and they're growing through this current climate. And we get very excited about companies like Modzy and Rated People and those that are using technology to enable new solutions in the marketplace. In the case of Modzi, she's doing design, 3D rendering design for the end user. And she's got a phenomenal platform that greatly democratizes, if you would ask me, design aesthetic, which is completely intimidating and foreign to me. But as I look in the portfolio, there are equally those that are addressing issues that are not part of today's not part of today's COVID-19 crisis. And Full Harvest is one of them that's addressing food systems. And she's a marketplace for ugly food. And she's worked to find a market for second and third growth harvests here in North America. And soon she'll be taking on the world. And she spoke at Davos this year. And it's just a reminder that entrepreneurs are really leading change, and our role as investors, going back to your early question about how I think about these things as an investor, my role as an investor is as an enabler, and I'm in a service business, and I get to be in the service of these amazing entrepreneurs that you ask about.
Sound like a tremendous portfolio. Congratulations on that. And as you see all these startups launch and grow, what are the challenges they face today? Is it in general regulatory? Is it the market? Is it technology? What do you see your startup struggling with the most?
Well, and notably, Astia is not afraid to invest in, and I personally am not afraid to invest in regulated spaces. And I say that recognizing that some of our most recent businesses have grown in spite of their violation of regulatory concerns. And I think a lot of the gig economy has grown outside of regulation, but I'm not particularly afraid or concerned about regulation as it relates to my entrepreneurs. I think the greatest challenge for a high growth entrepreneur has to do with resources. The companies I invest in, because they're led by and include women leaders, are going to have challenges with funding. That's through no fault of their own. These are amazing and outperforming companies. But because of the way venture and angel networks are set up and they're predominantly male, those networks will struggle to welcome in companies that I invest in. So their greatest challenge will be fundraising, interestingly. Right behind that are human resources. Hiring and hiring well for the startup is really critical. And we're very much believers in the research around diverse teams and diverse teams outperforming. We're always pointing our entrepreneurs to the research out of MIT because we use it ourselves from Professor Tom Malone that shows that for teams to really be able to innovate and achieve what he defines as group intelligence, they must include 3 elements. And one of them is team dynamic, how well the teams dialogue with each other. Do they yell or do they dialogue? Another one is how well do the teams intuit each other? Do they read each other's body language in addition to hearing the words? And then the third is how many women on those teams. So as our companies hire, we work very hard to talk to them about the importance of team and the importance of building teams that are ripe for innovation and that are required for innovation to succeed. And certainly diverse teams outperform for us as investors. But I think most notably, they outperform for the customers in these companies that we've invested in.
Very good. Well, you see a lot of sectors and applications out there. If you had to pick 1 or 2 that you think are good immediate opportunities for investors to pursue, what would you call out today?
As I mentioned, I believe investment is very personal. And so what I like to highlight for investors, and quite honestly, those who are not yet investors but should be, because there are a lot of us on the sidelines. Many of us do our investing, but we call it philanthropy. We give critical dollars to all sorts of cancer research and other solutions solving marketplace needs, but those same dollars can be invested in startups and for returns and equity-based investing. And the reason that I always highlight that is as I said earlier, I do believe that investment is personal. And so the place for any investor to start and the exciting opportunities right now, today, for any investor is where are your passions? Where are your interests? And if you look for entrepreneurs who are addressing solutions that align with your passions, your likelihood of succeeding as an investor increases and your likelihood of the company's success increases. My own personal passions have to do with feeding a planet, solving some of the greatest health needs and health crises of our day, and solving for a growing population. So as I look in my portfolio, those are all emerging and interesting markets for any investor to look at. But whether or not they align with their personal interests and personal values, well, that's for them to define.
Well, great. So in the last few minutes that we have here today, what else should we cover that we haven't?
Well, something that I am always struck by is when I say that I invest in teams that include women, somehow listeners assume that either A, I only invest in women only teams and I only invest with other women. And what I like to do is make sure to talk about that I'm an investor in inclusion. And all of the teams I invest in have men and women, and they have a phenomenal representation of race and geography. And that's important to me. And it's important to us as a world to understand how to create a portfolio that's able to include those that don't look like ourselves. And for my investor peers within Astia, we are half men and half women. And it's always notable that men have a voice and a role in this work of investing in teams that include women. And their call to action is equal to and identical to the call to action for women investors who are looking at companies that include women. But it's up to us as investors. The problem is not with the entrepreneurs. The problem is not that women aren't starting startups or that women are too risk averse. Quite the opposite. It is that investors have developed means and methodologies for sourcing and screening companies that ensures that the only ones who get through are those who look like and are quite similar to ourselves. And those networks that are built on our own personal networks need to be broken down, or certainly built or extended well beyond that so that they can include those entrepreneurs from other groups. Because it's those other entrepreneurs, those other group entrepreneurs who are addressing some amazing and huge market opportunities. And they do promise and hold the future of innovation.
Well, that's an important distinction to make, and I'm glad you make it. So go ahead and close today. How best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
I make myself very available. I'm in a service industry as an investor. I'm Sharon at astia.org, and my phone number's in my signature line and pretty available on the web as well. And I actually encourage people to reach out directly. More importantly, if you're an entrepreneur who's raising capital at any stage of high growth, Astia would love to take a look. If you value and include women on your leadership team, you simply go to our website, astia.org, and apply, and we'll get you right into the expert sift. And that expert sift not only will give you access to our capital, but also to our network of expert advisors who are at the ready and ready to lend their network of customers and expertise.
Great. We'll add those to the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciated the time, Hall.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org.
Hall T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.